And good evening and welcome to About the Valley. My guest tonight is Lisa from the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Yes, sir.
And we're going to talk about beetles. And we're not talking about the rock group. We're talking about real beetles with two E's, not an A.
That's right.
And these beetles aren't from England, they're from Asia.
Correct?
And they have invaded a part of Massachusetts.
Yes.
And I think you pretty much got it under control now.
We're definitely working in that direction.
But everybody's, I'm sure, heard about it. There was a big press on it a few years back when it first, probably about, how long has it been now?
A little over 10 years at this point. The thick of it really occurred in 2011 when we really started kicking up our identification of infestations. So this is the Asian longhorn beetle that we're talking about. There are a few other infestations around the country, but the Worcester infestation is closer to probably about 20 years old, but our participation in it and since
years.
Identification has probably been about 12 years.
Wow. We talked about earlier about how time flies.
Time flies.
That's gone by pretty quick.
It has. It's been busy work for sure.
Now, one of the things they did is they searched out the trees that had them and then ground them up.
Yes. So one of the tricky things about this particular pest is that they haven't found a way to treat trees that have been infested with this particular beetle. So once the tree has been infested, the beetle has taken hold, the only option to treat that tree is to remove the tree, which is really unfortunate. It's a really tough decision to make. It's a hard call, but we remove the tree and we grind the stumps to make sure that there isn't any host material left that beetle can perpetuate its life cycle in. We really do the best job to get it out as completely as possible, and that's all part of the eradication program, and I might use that word a couple more times tonight.
Like you say, you put them through a grinder.
Yep.
And one time you would bring that pulp up to Pittsburgh, weren't you?
Yeah, so in the beginning of the program, we were cutting the trees, grinding the stumps, and then chipping and incinerating all of the chips.
Right, I was going to say, because they made electricity out of it.
Yes, and that's a whole other operation. Beyond my scope, for sure.
But it was a good way of getting rid of it, because you really couldn't store that for too long. You didn't want to take a chance that you're grinding up, the beetle in there is grinding the beetle up, but they're laying eggs.
Yes.
And there's a concern that those eggs will hatch. Now the larvae is out there.
Exactly. So unfortunately, that's how the infestation came to be established in Massachusetts and different parts of the United States to begin with. It came in untreated solid wood packing material. So now all of our wood packing material, our pallets, our shipping crates and things like that, it's treated. We don't have to worry about pests traveling in that way. But at the time, they sort of snuck through. It was off the radar in the early 80s before we caught on to this possibility. So now...
So they came in as eggs.
They came in as eggs, as larvae, and potentially pupa. Not the adults.
Right.
But they were just hidden in packing material.
Yes, that's why nobody noticed them.
Exactly. And so it wasn't until they emerged as adults and found their way to some host material, some host trees, that they were able to become established and start reproducing and causing the damage that we see now.
Now, how did the USDA come about noticing this or finding out about it?
Yeah, so that's an interesting story. It's come from a couple different places. Our infestation was not the first infestation. So this problem had cropped up in different places around the U.S. prior to being detected in Worcester. And the neat thing is that many of the infestations were detected just by curious local residents that were aware of their own property, aware of the things that they had seen in years past. And a woman in Worcester just saw it and called it in. And the person she called into said, hey, this looks wrong. This looks like this thing I've read about. I think we should call it into the USDA. And so it got elevated just by this one woman expressing concern, really about it being a safety concern for her grandkids. And here we are.
She didn't recognize what it was.
Exactly.
The adult. And so she called in to wonder, what is this thing here? But as we were saying earlier, we have a beetle that's quite similar to this one.
We do.
And I've spotted one on my deck a few years back, and I was told, no, don't worry about it, it's not the one, that's not it.
Yep. So here, native to Massachusetts and the rest of New England is the white-spotted Sawyer. That's in the same family as the Asian longhorn beetle. Another big black and white beetle.
Right.
Big antenna.
Yeah, it looks a lot like that.
It does. The difference is that the white spot on the white-spotted pine Sawyer is this little triangular spot right at the back of its neck where the wing covers meet. That's
Oh.
always black on the Asian longhorn beetle. They have white spots all over, but their white spots are never right there. On the white-spotted Sawyer that we get a lot of calls about, always white on that particular spot.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Well, when people take a look at this, this is what it really looks like.
This is it. This is a picture of one
so
right here. Yep.
If you do see one, give someone a call.
Give us a call. There's an Asian Longhorn Beetle hotline. There's also a website called Beetle Busters that you can log into and send us information. We love to see pictures of beetles.
Yeah, everyone has a phone today, so take a picture of it.
Snap a shot. We want to see
Yeah.
it. Right now is the time of year that we see a lot of white-spotted Sawyers. We get tons of calls. You said you called yourself tons and tons of calls.
I was suspicious of it because I read about the beetle and I said, boy, that looks like one.
It's a striking and large beetle, so absolutely
Yeah.
we get a ton of calls. Asian longhorn beetles tend to come out a little bit later in the summer is when we start seeing adults find their way out. But if there's ever, if there's ever a question, if there's ever a concern, we want to hear about it. So.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And fortunately, it didn't spread south. It tended to go north.
From this location, it
Right.
tends to it's kind of followed this northeastern
Yeah.
byway, I guess, from what started as the core, and it spread somewhat south and radiated out from the central part of Worcester where we believe it became established initially. But
Now, it could have been that something that was shipped into the industrial area in Greendale.
absolutely, and that's been the case with a lot of the infestations. Is that a lot of these infestations again date back to the 80s when there were massive imports coming in
Right.
to port cities and industrial areas, and they were just unpacked and left stacked like we still do, except now the same risk isn't there because we treat that way.
I know the Norton Company was a good, helped you out in that area. They let you use some of their facility.
Yeah, we had a lot of help. The state of Massachusetts has been wonderful. So I work for the USDA, but
Right.
the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation has been an incredible ally and partner with us, as well as the Department of Agriculture here in the state. And then there are a number of cooperators that have contracted with us to help with removals, to help with facilities, and get this program established. And
Yeah, because
get things
originally,
taken care of.
it was a huge undertaking originally. I mean, you had tremendous amount of infestation.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, we eliminated a lot of trees.
We did have to take a lot of trees, and that was certainly the most devastating part of the program, were those first few years when we were identifying trees by the tens and in some
Yeah.
cases by the hundreds, and ultimately removing tens of thousands of trees. And it was hard. I mean, it was hard for residents. It was hard for us as tree lovers and tree
Yeah.
advocates. It's been a devastating infestation. but
There's
we've
been a
made
good
lot of progress.
replacement program.
Yes. So that is the silver lining, albeit a little bit painful. Hard to get rid of those mature trees. Hard to see those big changes happen.
Right.
We did put an enormous amount of effort, along with our partners at DCR, to replace the trees that were removed, as many of them as we could, close to a matching number, and also replace them with trees that were a little bit more diverse, that weren't host material for the beetle, in hopes of having an urban canopy in Worcester, but also a wooded canopy in other places that's just a
Right.
little bit more resilient to anything else that might come in. And so in a few years, and even now, we're finally starting to see those trees grow and mature, but it was a major change. It was a hard hit for
Yeah,
some
and
neighborhoods.
you can't replace them with a full-grown tree. That doesn't happen.
It just doesn't.
So fortunately, the ones you did place have grown, and it's been a number of years now, so they've.
It has been, many of them are not, still not those old
They're
trees
not
that some
tobacco,
people know
yeah,
and recognize.
because
But
some of those trees were well over 100 years old.
it's true, and that's especially hard, to take a tree that has been there for a long time
Yeah.
and neighborhood residents have grown attached to.
What species got hit the worst in the trees?
So the most prevalent and most desired host are maples, generally speaking. I know, and everybody's most beloved.
We're maple country.
We are, and that's one of the reasons New England we take this so seriously, and I personally feel really proud to be involved in this because our maple trees are so important to us here.
Yeah, I mean, well, we're basically a hardwood area.
We are.
So, and they don't grow, well, they grow fast at first, but then they reach a certain point, they slow down quite a bit, and the growth takes for a long time then.
It's true. So it's hard to replace those trees, and
yeah, you don't get a good canopy for a long time.
A long time. So we feel very fortunate to have caught this infestation when we did, and we also feel really fortunate that we've had so much progress.
Right.
There are other infestations of ALB around the U.S. Many of them have already been eradicated. There's a small what we call a satellite infestation in Boston. So
oh, really?
Really, just a small handful of trees, nothing quite like the Worcester situation. But again, a property manager that was just very diligent noticed some damage on some trees and called it in, and we were able to get in there. We did have to remove a couple trees, but that regulated area, that infestation was deemed eradicated several years ago. So that was something that we were able to get in, take care of, and close down really quickly. And we've made enormous strides in Worcester too.
Well,
we have a lot more ground to cover here.
As far as tree species go, New England was famous for its chestnuts and its elms. And we lost both of those to blights.
Yeah.
I mean, there's still some around, but I know, and behind my house, this good wood, about 10-acre wooded area, the elms will grow to a certain size and then they die.
Yeah, it's a tough thing, and that's it. I hate to say it's the good thing about ALB, but something that's heartening about this project is that it's not something like a blight that just moves so rapidly and is difficult to get under control.
Usually, if you get a tree blight and it's a fungus or something like that, they just wipes them out.
It wipes it out. We have the ability to get this under control.
Right.
We've done it in other cities. We're closer to doing it here than we ever have been. We're closer every year, and so that is a great thing. And it's been a devastating thing in some areas, but there's a lot of hope, I guess, attached to this project as well.
Well, New England forests do have rejuvenation. I mean, you're probably familiar if you're into this, that, at the end of the 18th century, 19th century into the 20th century, there weren't any trees in Massachusetts.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people don't realize
farmland.
Yeah. And there was another thing, too, was the manufacturing needed charcoal. So if you go out to Western Mass, go out to Amherst area, you can still see the kilns on the sides of the mountain where they cut all the trees down and made charcoal.
Unbelievable, huh?
It is, and the kilns are still there, but the trees grew up around them again.
The forests are resilient,
Yes.
and we would hate to lose our maples, but we're lucky that even with so much change that's come along with ALB and other pests and other blights, things do bounce back.
Yes.
Maybe different from the way they were before, but they do have sort of an uncanny ability to regenerate and come back. And
yeah, when the farmland when they stopped farming, you go through and it's a young forest, but it grows in pretty quick.
It does, especially some of those smaller trees, those birches and those poplars start coming back very quickly. We're seeing that with some of the places that we had to remove a large number of infested trees.
What are some of the trees that are more resilient?
Oaks are one, and then the softwood trees, any of our pines or cedars, things like that, they tend to avoid. Oaks, fortunately, like I said, we don't have to survey. Those are not a host.
I don't want to get off subject of beetle, but this is your field. I'd like to have some questions about that. Have you noticed the cedars are getting brown?
Oh, boy. I haven't personally. And I mean, certainly on some landscapes, I am an Asian longhorn beetle expert. I am not a plant pest expert.
I didn't know.
No, and that's okay. There are certainly people out there that just know
I was
far
just
more
wondering,
about
was
other...
something wrong? And even some of the, well, a lot of the conifers
Yeah.
are getting brown leaves on them, needles.
Yep. There are a number of things out there, and I would say that the local state, Massachusetts DCR, as well as State University Extension Services, are just so much more expansive and well-versed in that than I am myself. I wish I
was just
could
curious
speak
if
to
you
it.
might have known something. I noticed it on the side, especially along the
Yeah.
roads.
There are, I want to be hopeful, but there are always plant pests, whether that's insects or
Yeah.
or other fungi and things that creep in. And a lot of those are part of the natural process, and have their own natural cycles
Right.
that come in, and we lose some trees, or, trees struggle for a few years and things kind of circle back around. So not all of that is necessarily out of the ordinary. Some years it just tends to catch our eye or is in a location that catches our eye more than others. But when it comes into the nitty gritty, there's much more to know beyond my personal scope for sure.
I'm a big, I like identifying. I have an app on my phone
Oh yeah.
where I can take a picture, and it's amazing. It tells me almost instantly what kind of tree it is by the leaves.
There are some good apps out there, and I caught on to the apps early because I am such a nature lover and I'm always
Yep.
outside. And a big part of my job, of course, is identifying trees and different plants. And it's been a pleasant surprise to see them evolve from something that I felt like, oh, that's a little iffy. The reliability wasn't great. But as time goes on, the apps are better, the identification is better, and nature is just kind of becoming more accessible.
Yeah, I'm walking around, even in my yard, and I say, I wonder what kind of tree that is, or what kind of bush, and I put it in,
Click.
and here it comes, tells me
Yeah.
exactly what, flowers, everything. It's amazing. It cost me like $3 a month or something.
Think it's worth it?
Oh, to me it is. We go shopping for flowers with my wife, and I take, what's the kind of this? And then I look to see on the tag if they're right.
Has it been good so far?
Sometimes
Yeah.
they're using the third name.
Oh, okay.
So they'll give you multiple names, and they might have, so I guess, a lot of plants have multiple names.
Yes. So there is a pretty long and I won't say complicated, but a lengthy taxonomy. So usually
Right.
when we're talking about plants, we talk about genus or species. So a maple would be a genus.
Right.
And then a species would be a sugar maple. But a lot of time cut flowers or things like that in the store, they probably bring it back to family, which is a larger,
Yeah, and
larger
they
group,
make
yeah.
it sound, like something you recognize.
sure.
But anyway, the beetle is still a problem in Mass.
It is.
But I heard something about it. They were finding some in Boylston or West Boylston.
Yeah, so things have slowed down dramatically, which is a good thing. We're finding fewer and fewer infested trees. We're catching fewer and fewer beetles in traps.
Mm-hmm.
It's been several years now since we've captured a beetle in a trap, which is a great way of detecting that we're reducing the number of adults in the population. In Boylston, there was a smaller infestation found a couple years ago. The most recent infestation was just a single tree in Auburn that was very isolated and doesn't seem to have led to any other infested trees, which is great. So.
Yeah, another beetle that I remember back in the 50s we got infestation is the Japanese beetle.
Mm-hmm.
And
That are still around.
Yeah, and more because nobody did anything to control it. And now that's where you get your grubs from.
Yeah, it's these invasive pests are so tricky. With ALB, I mentioned before, we're fortunate that its life cycle works in this way, and its behavior works in a way that we're able to go for a goal of eradication. We can manage this, and we think that we can get rid of it entirely. So many things, the Japanese beetle being one of them. Entomologists and land managers kind of have to look at it and say, well, how quickly does this spread? How can it be treated? And can we get a handle on this? Or do we try to control it as best we can and encourage homeowners to encourage it the best they can? And, there's so many nuances. There's so many details. ALB is one that we can get rid of. So many others are things that we just
And the one
encourage
thing
folks to
that
take care
makes
of.
it bad is nature takes care of itself. But when you put these invasive species in,
Right.
they don't have any enemies. They have nothing that's going to keep them under control.
And that's exactly the problem, and that's why we see these dramatic infestations where populations sort of explode. There are no natural checks and balances to keep those at bay, no natural predators, or not enough natural predators to keep them at bay at the same time.
Yeah, in some cases, our birds won't eat those.
Right. Right. Or the birds that, well, another thing that happens is that their life cycle is out of sync of the timeline that certain things are looking for certain types of food.
Whereas where they come from, they have natural predators, and it keeps them under control.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So,
another good example of that is the gypsy moth.
yeah. Rough few years for gypsy moths.
Yeah, do you know how it came here?
I don't know the history of the gypsy moth.
Medford, Mass.
The whole town of Medford. We can't blame the whole town of Medford.
Well, unfortunately, I believe it's Medford. There was a man there who imported them because he wanted to make silk.
Oh, dear.
And because they do have that long silk that they use, that you see them hanging from the trees. And he had them on a windowsill, and a jar fell off and broke, and they got away.
Oh, no.
And then there's where it starts. They lay their eggs. The first thing you know, there's more, and then there's more.
And then...
And you remember back, was it in the 80s? Or probably, I think it was in...
I do.
Yeah, when it looked like winter.
We've had a couple of waves that have been really, I mean, just the last few years as well. We had another, not quite as significant.
In certain areas.
But in certain areas, exactly. Yeah. Southeastern Mass and out closer to the Cape was really hard hit.
And the birds won't eat them because they got so much fur on them. But there is a bird that does eat them. Chickens.
I should have known that. My chickens would agree.
Chickens eat anything. You know that. If it moves, they eat it.
That's true.
Because we had the big infestation here. I had a half a dozen chickens. And I just let them loose in my yard.
Have at it, girls.
Yeah. Oh, they were having a great time. And I got a lot of fresh eggs.
I was going to say, I bet that helped the eggs production as well.
They were happy.
I believe it.
It saved on feed.
Everybody wins.
Yeah.
Except for the caterpillars.
But that's been under control now for pretty much so. But I think it takes a cycle.
It takes a cycle. There are a number of things that the state here in Massachusetts really takes care of a lot of the gypsy moth infestations. But there are a number of things that contribute to that. There are some natural fungi and viruses that help keep that population in control.
That's what brought them under control last time.
Weather also helps. So this, not this past year, but the year prior, we had a very, very wet, very chilly spring, and that helped contribute to knocking that population back and not allowing those hatching larvae to grow into adults. So a few things come into play. Some years are a little different than others. We're learning more all the time.
But there's been no thing that you've seen that actually keeps these beetles under control. There's no virus. There's no.
Not that we've been able to find
yet,
and nothing that would be safe to release. So once you get into talking about biological controls and releasing other things to control something else, it can be a very tricky thing, and we'd never want to create an additional problem to get one problem under control. So far, there doesn't seem to be anything natural that we can release, and there doesn't seem to be anything chemical that we can inject that will affect beetles once they've started burrowing into the tree. Oh. And so, unfortunately, like I said before, removal at this point is just the only safe and effective method.
Now, they, like most insects, in the adult stage, they don't eat.
That is mostly true.
Yeah.
Adult Asian longhorn beetles actually do feed at the very beginning of the adult phase of their life cycle. We call it maturation feeding. Just builds their energy stores up, and that's it's very subtle damage that you do to a tree, but they like to eat the veins of leaves on the tree as well as the very fresh bark on new branches.
The real soft bark.
The really soft stuff, just to get going, and then at that point they're focused more on breeding and reproduction.
But it's the larvae that do the eating inside the tree.
It's the larvae that do really all the damage. The adults do tunnel their way out. So they pupate, they transform inside the tree. And the adults are what leave behind these sort of perfectly round, what we call exit holes. There are a bunch of them all over this thing.
Yes. I was going to say, but when they initially go in to lay their eggs,
Yep.
they'll do a hole to do that, right?
Yes.
They'll
So
gnaw
they
their
lay
way
their
in.
eggs just under the bark of the tree. So
Oh,
the females
okay,
will.
so it's not a hole like that.
It's not a hole, not like that. It's more of a dent. They dig a little bit of a pit. They chew it with their mouth parts, and then they deposit a single egg. And it's that single egg that hatches into a larva that does all of this damage underneath the bark in the cambium. And if you're looking at this sample, you can see that it's really dented up here, and there are all these kind of nooks and crannies and sawdust
Okay, so
coming out.
this bark wasn't removed by you.
This bark was removed by us, so you could see
Oh,
the
okay.
damage underneath. So this piece is missing the bark,
Well, I'm
which is
trying to-
unfortunate. But
I'm trying to get from you is, how would we see this in the woods that we would know there was some beetle damage being done?
yes, so there are a few things that you would see. Those egg sites that I mentioned could certainly be one. They're of a significant size. It's a large beetle, and
Right.
they do chew a pretty significant egg site for every single egg, and that can be 60, 90 eggs in an adult's life cycle. So a single female can do a lot of damage just
Yeah.
digging those pits to deposit her eggs. And so that's something that our ground survey staff, myself, are looking for. The other thing to look for would be those round holes. So that would be chewed. It's chewed from the inside out, but it chews straight out through the tree. And they're perfectly round holes, just a little bit smaller than a dime. And they're pretty significant size. They're noticeable. You'd catch it if you were looking at an infested
Now,
tree.
do the males fertilize the eggs in the tree?
The males fertilize the eggs with the females. So
Oh, okay.
they will copulate, and then
All
males
right.
often
'Cause
stay
some,
with the
some
female
will do
too.
fertilize the eggs separately.
No, they will fertilize together, and then the males will often stay with the female to
Oh.
ensure that she doesn't take on another mate.
Oh, wow.
They make sure that they're going to be the one.
Now, once they lay their eggs, is that their end of their life cycle?
Pretty much. I mean, the adults don't live an exceptionally long time, so they're not especially short-lived. You know, some insects only live for a matter of hours or days.
So it's
Adult
kind of hard
beetles
to
can
spot them
persist
as adults.
It is, and they spend a lot of time, further up in the tree. They're trying to stay hidden. At the point that they've reached adulthood, they are really just
So
looking.
unless you're climbing
they're-
the trees, you're not going to
exactly.
really run
They're
into
looking
them.
to mate. They're looking to reproduce, and they don't want to be found.
Well, yeah, yeah.
So that's one thing that's tricky. The other, they're not very mobile either. I mean, the picture up on the screen you saw, and they're a large beetle. They're not excellent flyers.
Oh,
So
okay.
they're not to say that you couldn't see one flying around. Certainly
Yeah.
people have seen them, caught them, found them, seen them flying around. But they're not buzzing about like some insects are.
They fly
tend
enough to
be-
get higher up in the tree.
They'll get higher up in the tree. Maybe they'll move from branch to branch. But they don't spend a lot of time in flight. They spend a lot more time crawling on the surface of the tree itself. So they tend to be, the beetles themselves tend to be more elusive. It's more than likely the damage that we're looking for on the tree. That tends to be, it doesn't move. It's pretty permanent.
Right.
And generally speaking, that's when we're looking for an active infestation. We're looking for the damage and not
You
the
spend a
beetle
lot of
itself.
time then walking through the woods?
Oh, yeah.
That
is what I
it's
do.
basically your job then.
That is basically my job, and many others who work alongside me. We call it ground survey,
Yeah.
and we pretty methodically work our way through the woods, or sometimes through residential neighborhoods, and looking at every single host tree and all pieces of host material that we can find on the landscape to look for damage.
That can be pretty grueling too. I mean, walking on the street's not bad, but when you get into the forest,
It
can be pretty tough.
We have been in terrain of all kinds.
I was going to say.
Sometimes it is absolutely beautiful. I mean,
Yeah.
there are wonderful times to be at work, but we certainly encounter ticks and thorns and
Yeah,
it can
yeah. Plus you
and
gotta
swamps, and it can be a rugged job.
Yeah.
But that can be the fun of it sometimes too.
deal with
you know.
mosquitoes and
I think everyone who's on the job is up for a challenge, and that's part of it, and we're determined and dedicated to get out there and get it done.
That's gotta be quite a job. I mean, it's a fun. I love walking through the woods, but I like to make it nice and easy, especially at my age. By the way, 508-266-0990. If you get any questions, now's the time to call while Lisa's here. She's only going to be here for another half hour. So if you did see any, if you think you've seen any, let her know, because this is the time we can have it checked out. But like I said, for the most part, it's been heading in that northeasterly direction.
For sure. But
even in the city, you didn't find many in the downtown area, did you?
Well, there are fewer trees in the downtown part of Worcester.
Right. Well, and you have a good-sized park.
For sure, yes. So the Greendale area was very hard hit, but there were certainly localized pockets. So another way that the beetle tends to move, and we believe that this is true of the Boston infestation that was very far off from this core area, is that it can be transported in firewood, which is, of course, against
Right.
regulation. But it can also, we believe, hitch a ride in a car.
Oh.
Be stuck to a wheel, be stuck to a windshield,
Oh.
be tucked in somewhere, and believe it or not, I mean, it's happened before. So we don't want to discourage anyone who sees damage that looks similar or finds a beetle on their property, regardless of where you're located.
Yeah,
To
well,
be
that's been said
discouraged.
about other insects, especially if someone's coming out of the south, where they have a lot more insects because of what the climate's more inducing to them. They bring them up here.
It's certainly happened. I mean, human transportation is a large part of. It's not the
Yeah.
only part of, but it's certainly a large part of the spread of invasive species.
On trains,
trains,
freight trains heading north.
vehicles.
But yeah, I say in Worcester, you didn't really get that because you got Elm Park is not that far from there,
That's true.
and a lot of trees there.
There are a diversity in trees at Elm Park, although there
Yeah.
were trees in proximity that were found, and it's hard to say how those got there. Some localized infestations did come from people moving firewood from within the city bounds. Some
That
of
was
them
a
likely
big
came
problem,
from
wasn't it, with the
vehicles.
firewood? You had to really get that under control.
Yes, and firewood can be a huge vector for pests all over, and that's something that we try to advocate for our program and for a lot of other related programs, is to try to keep firewood as local as you can.
I know, if you go down 395 heading into Connecticut, you got a big sign, no firewood.
Firewood, yep.
And, I mean, I think it's kind of died down now. A lot of people gone to pellets.
Mm-hmm.
But at one point, especially at the last oil shortage, the one we had, every oil shortage, people went wild, went and bought wood burning stoves.
Mm-hmm.
Can't say wood stove. Wood stove means they're made out of wood. That wouldn't work too well.
Not a good idea.
No, but wood burning stoves, and of course you got to get firewood. I did it for 30 years, but I burnt the wood in my backyard. I had 10 acres of it.
Yeah, of course, wood fuel is a more sustainable fuel,
Yeah.
and we don't want to discourage that. But we do want to encourage people to, like you said, you had 10 acres of wood, to keep it as local as possible.
Right.
If you're buying wood from somewhere else, to know that what their protocols are, and make sure that they are doing their due diligence.
I've gone to pellets.
A lot of people have. A lot of
20
people.
years ago when my first retirement. I says, I can't do this wood cutting. I used to cut 6-7 quarters
lot of work.
year.
That's a real lot of work.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I would do it over the winter on weekends.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. It was
Keeps you
amazing.
warm, I guess.
Yeah, it kept me warm twice. When I cut it,
when you
and
cut it, and then when you burned
and
it.
I burned it. Yeah. But I didn't mind doing it, and it saved me a lot of money. But I said I've gone to pellets. A lot of people have gone to pellets, and that's clean because that's processed.
Sure, yeah.
So it's a little bit different. But yeah, it's got to be a problem. But yeah, you see wood being sold in a lot of places for somebody to burn in their backyard on a summer night or in the fireplace. Just have a small fire. So you're still going to be on top of that. Now, these bundles that they sell at the convenience stores and the supermarkets, do they bring that in from out of state sometimes?
They do. So there are a number of ways to sort of safeguard the movement of pests through firewood in that way. A lot of that stuff is kiln dried.
Yeah.
So that's going to mitigate a lot of whatever is going to persist in that wood.
Right.
The stuff that we really worry about is green material, stuff that's a lot fresher, that hasn't been treated or dried in any formal capacity.
So if the wood cutting places, just keep that under control.
That's the hope. Certainly within, I mean, it's a little bit different. That's pretty nuanced. I would say within the Worcester area, within what we call the regulated area, there is no movement of firewood outside of this area. So that's a little bit different.
How do you regulate that though with individuals? If someone goes in and starts cutting trees and...
Yeah, well, that's a whole part of our program. We have a whole regulatory compliance program where we work with some individual homeowners, but we work with a lot of landscaping companies, arborist companies, excavation companies to inform them about the beetle, the life cycle, and what the best practices are for both recognizing that damage if they come across it and what to do, and then also the regulations for handling wood. And so right now, host material of Asian longhorn beetles at all, maple is not allowed to leave this area at all, as firewood or otherwise. And so we have a whole program in place, and that's a big part of the mitigation process, those people working alongside of us and participating in that program, which people do willingly.
Yeah, I can see it,
really
with the tree cutting services, it's easy to control. You just go and talk to them and they'll sure they cooperate. But what about an individual going in and cutting their own wood?
Yeah, so you
have to keep an eye open for it.
We encourage people to have an eye open for it, and that's where things like this come into play, is that everything else when it comes to individuals is our best outreach efforts. So MDAR, Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources, does a lot of our outreach material, and they are at a lot of different public events, opportunities like this where we can come and chat with you and spread the word and just really encourage people to do their own due diligence, be great stewards of their own property, and keep an eye out is really the best that we can do. And that's a big part of the program.
If this breaks out in another area, it can be devastating before you can catch it.
Hopefully, yeah, and it could be devastating. We're lucky that here, anyway, the evidence is that it's only getting smaller. Could we detect it somewhere else? Absolutely. There was an infestation detected at the beginning of 2020 in South Carolina. So it's possible that ALB can crop up somewhere else or be detected somewhere else that it's been...
Was that a new infestation? So it must have come in on another wood product somewhere?
It was new to us, but not new. Similar to the Worcester infestation. It's tough with these insects, especially with insects that are so elusive. And spend so much time up in the trees that you don't necessarily catch on right away that something's amiss.
Yeah, until you got a number of trees that are damaged.
A number of trees are damaged, or someone just sees a bug and say, "What on earth is this? I've never seen this before." And so that's how these things very often have been detected, and that was the case with South Carolina as well. It's new to us. We're involved, and there's a great eradication effort similar to what's going on here in Worcester, starting up there. But
well, you can see that the Department of Agriculture takes it pretty serious when they have someone like yourself just specializing in this one area.
It's absolutely something that they take seriously, and as all invasive insects, a large part of this is that we love our forests. Our forests are beautiful, and we love the nature and the beauty of them, and we also love the economics of our forests. It's a huge part of the New England lifestyle. It's a huge part of agriculture. It's a huge part of the tourism industry, and so it's really important to us that we're preserving our natural habitat, but that we're also preserving the economics of this area as well. And so there's a whole lot invested in it, and also because we think we can be successful in it, and that's a big part of it as well.
Yeah, and the thing is that, they're going after the maple, which is really...
Yeah. Nobody wants to lose their maple syrup.
No.
It's a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, this thing got loose in Vermont. It'd be devastating.
It would be absolutely devastating. And there have been regional efforts too. There have been Check Your Tree initiatives, the Don't Move Firewood initiatives. You've seen huge billboards. The language and the the outreach related to this has spread far and wide. Worcester is certainly the epicenter of this. We have done a great deal of work, we being local citizens and also the USDA and state governments have done a lot of work to say, hey, like, please do keep an eye out. So if it is in Vermont or if it is in New Hampshire, we catch it as soon as possible.
Yes.
And if it's not there, we become aware of it now so it doesn't get there. And we do what we can to eradicate it from this area so it spreads.
What part of Asia are these beetles from?
They are native to a pretty large area in Southeast Asia. They're actually a pretty common beetle there. They call them the Starry Sky Beetle as sort of a common name. And they are beautiful. They have that shiny black back and those sort of mottled black speckling pattern. And so they're there. They have a few other similar species there as well, but they are not uncommon there at all.
It's all of it, well, I should say, more so in the area of China,
Yes.
Japan,
I'm actually not sure about Japan.
but China
But
anyway.
certainly China
And what are the trees that they go after there? Don't they have any maples?
They do, actually. And so that's the interesting thing. We were talking before about taxonomy and, you know, what trees are related to what. So there are certainly things in the same genera and same family in that area that they also can go after. But again, those sort of natural checks and balances and more natural populations of trees. So one thing that's different about Worcester and the New England area is that we're very maple. You said before we're a hardwood forest. We're very maple heavy, and Worcester was very heavily planted with Norway maples and other trees. So it's not just those predators and the types of wood. It's the variety of wood as well, and that was a part of our replanting effort to add more diversity there, because the more diversity there is, the less of a problem it is. So if you plant a monoculture, and this has been a problem in some parts of Asia as well, where they did plant monocultures of certain poplars, and these boring beetles came in, and they're not necessarily invasive, but they have this smorgasbord of all the same material that they just love to eat, so they kind of go a little wild. So there are a lot of things that play into that sort of natural balance, and it's not just who eats the beetle, but it's also what does the beetle eat and how much of it is there and available.
Well, what are their natural predators in China?
That's a great question. I would say certainly some birds. And beyond that, I don't know. Probably also some small rodents. And some of those animals will feed on them here, just not in the abundance.
Right, they could have other insects that feed, because there are insects that feed on other insects.
Certainly. And that, their native behavior and their natural behavior is not something that I know as much about as maybe I should, now that you're asking about it, or as well as I know what happens here. And that's just because Southeast Asia has its own, immense natural habitat and biology that is just a whole lot to learn.
They have a lot of bamboo forests. I don't know if they bother with that.
Don't believe so. I don't believe
That's
so.
a kind of a hard bark.
Yeah, I mean, bamboo that's a totally different plant to begin with, and these guys really prefer their hardwoods. Bamboo is also hollow through the center. So remember, part of their life cycle require getting in the cambium, getting even when they pupate deep into the heartwood. So being a boring beetle, they're going to steer away from things that are hollow like that, or hard as it might be on the outside. But they really need the wood there on the inside to feed and complete their life cycle.
But I know, tracking invasive species has been a USDA job ever since they've been in existence, and you go back, that department goes back many years.
Yes.
Because it's always been a problem.
I think it just goes with the nature of
and now
moving food.
The world is so small now. I mean, you can travel around the world in no time.
That's it.
So in world trade is more than it's ever been.
Absolutely, and it's wonderful. I mean, it's a great resource to be able to move food and to move other natural resources globally is outstanding. I mean, it's a great resource that we have to be able to travel like that. But other things can find their way.
Just go back a couple of generations, and you couldn't buy strawberries in the winter.
Yeah.
You couldn't buy a lot, blueberries. you buy that stuff year round now because they're growing it in South America and bringing it up here. But now you got the USDA's got to be careful and make sure that stuff doesn't. Yeah, it was an incident, not too long ago, I think a couple of years back, where a woman brought home some bananas
Oh,
and
gosh.
they found a tarantula in them.
I heard about that. I saw
Yeah.
that news story.
Yeah. So,
And-
I mean,
Yeah.
these bananas went, from where they were shipped in Central America usually, up to here, through the depot, into the distribution center, and back into the
I'm
store.
really glad those weren't my bananas.
And no one saw it. And no one saw it. You
It's-
think about that.
I
That's
mean,
pretty,
it's diligent. It takes a lot of diligence. You
Yeah.
know, it takes a lot of education, and it takes a lot of, boots on the ground. It takes a lot of pairs of eyes
Oh,
looking. I happen to look at trees, but I work alongside of hundreds, thousands of other people at the USDA that are inspecting
yeah.
all different kinds of things. Fruits and other plant imports. And,
Yeah, a lot of people don't think about the USDA around here because we don't have a lot of farming.
right.
In fact, we got one dairy farm left in Northbridge here. We used to have at least a half a dozen. Because, it's a dying industry unless you're really big.
Right. I think what I learned about agriculture became more apparent to me when I became part of this organization is that agriculture is so much more than your local dairy farm, which is
Right.
infinitely important, absolutely. But it's beyond pastures and livestock.
Well,
It becomes our
We still got a number of
forests.
truck farms around. And those
Sure.
are coming back. So because people love fresh fruit and vegetables.
Don't we?
Yeah, but, we used to have tons of orchards.
Yeah.
They're gone because, they made money, but they worked hard.
Hmm.
And now it's easier. Well, hey, I can get how many thousands of dollars, millions of dollars for my land as a subdivision. So what the heck? I'll just sell it and live off the money.
Agriculture it's hard work.
Yeah, it is.
It is. It takes a lot of
How
dedication.
did you get into this?
How did I get into this? I got into this personally, being a lover of nature and plants and animals. And I went to college and I pursued, my background is in conservation biology. So I was really looking at, big picture, what can we do to protect wildlife populations,
Yep.
forests at large, habitats at large. And I've been a long-time Worcester resident. I'm not originally from Worcester, but a long-time Worcester resident now. And I was living here through the thick of all this. So it was always an interest of mine. And sort of lo and behold, over time, I found my way here onto this specific project. And it's great. It's wonderful to be able to advocate for something in the area where you live.
Right.
It's been a really cool opportunity for me, honestly.
You didn't go to the Stockbridge School by chance?
I didn't.
No.
I didn't. I went to school in southern New Hampshire.
Oh, okay.
But still not far off. So
Right.
this
No, I
southern
know a
New
number
England.
of people from around here that went there.
It's a very popular program, and
Yeah.
I work alongside of a lot of people there. And we work very closely with the UMass Extension and all that. They're a pretty big part of our program as well, and a great cooperator with us. So
But you
great
got into a
resource.
field that you really like, which is most important thing when you get a job.
It is.
Because then you don't feel like you're working.
It is absolutely true. And I never feel like I'm working. I mean, this is so fun. I have these opportunities to come
Yeah.
and talk about something that
You
I
should-
really like to do and that I really care about. And when I'm not here chatting, I get to be out in the woods looking at
Yeah, you
trees.
say, they give me a paycheck for this.
It's a wonderful job.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful job, and it's great to feel. It's great to enjoy what you do, and it's also great to feel good about what you do.
Right.
And it feels wonderful to spend time protecting something that I feel like is so valuable.
Now, what does come to closure, if it ever does, I don't know. A species like this is hard to bring to closure.
It's hard to bring to closure, but it's attainable. I believe that it's attainable.
Would you get transferred then?
Who knows? I don't know. That only time will tell.
Right.
It's an opportunity that I could look for. I mean, this pest may be eradicated here, but ALB certainly exists in different parts of the country.
Right.
And there are, like we just said, there are invasive pests, unfortunately,
Oh,
cropping up here and there kind of all the time. For everything that we bring in, that's wonderful. There's the potential for there to be
Yeah, it's
something
always-
else. And so, you know, what things look like in a few years or maybe a few more, a few less when this project wraps up. And I believe that it will wrap up. I really believe that we'll be successful with this over time. It's hard to say. You know, we learn so much over time.
yeah.
And how we manage this and how we manage other pests is something that is always evolving as well. So that's really hard for me to say.
There's a great TV show on Discovery Channel about how these inspectors at the at port of entries
Mm-hmm.
at airports that go through this stuff, and people bring in stuff that they know they're not supposed to. You have any food? Oh no, and then they start going, and they find all this stuff, and then they find insects in there, and that's quite a job that you have to do.
It takes a huge effort. I mean, there are a lot of people involved. Being in this position has really been educational to me in opening my eyes to see how many people are involved in keeping agriculture
Yeah.
safe in the United States. And certainly Customs and Border Patrol has a lot to do with
Right.
luggage inspection and things like that at airports and ports of entry. But it's an enormous effort and a valuable one because our food is so precious to us and our landscape is so precious
Oh,
to us.
absolutely, and you don't want something coming in and just. We've seen what the devastation can be.
Sure.
I mean, we saw it in Worcester like 20 years ago, when there weren't any trees in Greendale.
Right. And
Greendale wasn't green.
Greendale was not green, and we would love for something like ALB to never happen again, or to learn
Yeah.
enough to be more on top of issues like this before they become such a dramatic type of infestation.
Now, I know that you're still grinding the trees to a certain extent, right?
We are. So when we remove a tree,
What are they
they're still
doing with
chipped.
it now? They're not. I was talking to someone about that. They're not bringing it up to Fitchburg anymore to the incinerator.
We're not. Fortunately, we're removing significantly fewer trees, so
Yeah, so it's not worth
that
it.
helps. But we are grinding trees down to 1 inch by 1 inch or less chips, and that seems to be the size over time and research. We said, okay, as long as they've been chipped this small with a good consistency, the beetle cannot persist within that size material for any length of time.
So then you can actually take that material and put it back into the forest? Or?
Exactly. So then it can be composted. We call it at that point deregulated, which means that it's not as a material of concern at that point, as long as it's consistently chipped. And that's something I mentioned that program before, where we're always working with folks, and we check in on equipment and make sure that things are running running smoothly, running as they should. And that's all part of it.
Yeah, so you're not finding that many trees now.
We're not. It's been a while. Our last positive tree, I believe, was a whole year ago at this point. A little bit more than a year ago, which is a wonderful thing.
Yeah, it looks like you pretty much got it under control.
We hope so. It's 110 square miles, so it's a huge this regulated area. It's a lot of miles to walk, and part of our program and part of deeming ALB eradicated is making so many passes through an area and not finding any positive trees, any infested trees or evidence of the beetle.
But here again,
that
the
takes
difficult
time.
part is they're up so high, you can only do so much.
We can. We've actually been very successful. So Worcester's not eradicated yet, but there have been other cities that have eradicated the beetle. Chicago eradicated the beetle. There were a few New York infestations that were eradicated just at the end of 2019. And so there is success. We have a great amount of success with ground survey. So it's pretty incredible what you can do with a pair of binoculars and how much of the tree, once you learn what you're looking for and how to look for it, how to give a tree a thorough inspection, we have a great detection rate for finding positive trees. It's impossible to catch everything, and that's one of the reasons we do several rotations over years to make sure that we've been able to see things or given things just enough time to change a little bit, that if something was missed, we would see it the next time around. But it's incredibly accurate. this ground survey, you know, and it's binoculars. It's not just, you know, bare eye looking at a tree, which I always tell people to do anyway in your own yards. Is just, you don't need binoculars to do what I do. To do a thorough job, absolutely. But in your own yards, to keep an eye on your own trees, and to be a good steward of your own land, take a walk around your property, however large, however small, and just look it up and down.
That was probably your biggest asset, was the fact that people were very cooperative in the area, weren't they?
We have been so lucky, really, truly. The outreach efforts in this state were enormous, and the response was, by and large, incredibly positive. The citizens of Worcester and the surrounding towns, Boylston, West Boylston, Shrewsbury, anywhere within this regulated area, have really been largely supportive of us and welcoming. And it's hard, and we value that, we appreciate that, because we have had to take trees that people had a hard time saying goodbye to, and we've had a hard time saying that we've had to take. And that part of the program, that is certainly the most difficult part of the program,
You know
is
what's
removing
strange?
trees.
You're not old enough to remember the tornado of '53.
I know the story.
Yeah, I was around then, believe it or not. We actually got to go there because my grandmother was in the county hospital with tuberculosis.
Oh, wow.
It's no longer a county hospital, it's now part of the jail system. But anyway, they got devastated, that exact same area, Greendale, West Boylston, and Boylston. And now they got devastated again.
They
It's
get
almost like
devastated
it's a
again.
curse on them.
It's, well, and I can't say that it's directly linked, because I can't offer enough research to verify that. But one thing that does happen after a natural disaster like that, and what happened in Greendale in particular, and part of, in that specific area, what helped the beetle along was that after the tornado, they had to replant trees. And they replanted a lot of similar species. So we talked a couple times tonight about what happens when you plant a monoculture. And that wasn't true of all of Worcester.
Yeah.
But certainly, and it wasn't the only factor to the beetle spreading, but certainly replanting trees of Norway maples in a lot of cases that are,
But no one was aware of it at the time.
you don't know what you don't know. Absolutely. No one
Right.
was aware of it. It's a big, beautiful tree. It's going to grow
Yeah.
fast. And so a lot of trees that were lost in that tornado were replanted with trees that just, by sheer unfortunate coincidence,
Isn't that something?
happened to be.
I saw the coincidence because I know where the tornado devastated, and that's really something. That there's a lot of truth to that. Yeah.
It's really tricky. And so, like I said, it's not the only factor, but it did not, at least in the Greendale area, was, an unfortunate coincidence that on some streets anyway, that were just lined with
like Burncoat Street.
for ALB, and so that helped perpetuate that a little bit.
Wow. Well, Lisa, we're running out of time now.
Well, this has been great.
It's
That went by fast.
It does. Every guest I have says that. God, I worried a whole hour, but it went by so fast. But this is very interesting. And the watch for this beetle is probably in July.
Early July
Early
is
July.
when we really start looking for adults to come out of the tree.
So if you're walking around, take a look up in the trees. Take a look at that canopy and see if you notice anything.
Look for the beetle. Any unusual damage, perfectly round holes in your trees. That's the kind of stuff that we want to know about.
Right. I see some of these, but a lot of times I got a woodpecker that lives right near me. And
That'll do it too. There's always look-alike damage, but I tell people, we want to hear about it. If you're ever concerned.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Lisa Levine from USDA. And we're taking next week off. It's a long weekend. But we'll see you the week after that.